Hello and welcome to another episode of A Sacred Call to Action from Inclusive Justice. I am Kelsea Hector, your host. My pronouns are she, they, just your friendly neighborhood pagan. I'm here to interview Miguel. We're going to learn some great stuff today. So Miguel, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. My name is Miguel Flores. I am an Afro-Indigenous witch doctor. I was born into this practice. So some different terms for witch doctor are also known as medicine man or shaman. I am a spirit shaman, which means I actually specialize in the spirit realm in channeling spirits. My background is I am Afro-Indigenous. So on my father's side, we are Cherokee, and then my mother's side is Mexican, but we also have a lot of ancestral roots connected to the Aztecs. So I'm really, really excited to be here. I'm super excited. Oh, and I'm also a psychic medium, intuitive coach. I do everything divination. It's kind of just like my life.
It just comes to you.
Yeah.
I love that. That's beautiful. Well, I'm really excited to have you on. We're going to you prepare the questions for us today, which is amazing. So we're going to traverse just through, just kind of start off. The first question we have is, in what ways is organized religion harmful to communities? Which I think is a beautiful question to start off on, because every one previous to this podcast so far, so your number 4, has been from a tradition that is, comes from organized religion. We had a UCC pastor, we had a Methodist pastor, and then we had a seminarian who will eventually be a pastor. So I'm really excited to see where this conversation leads us.
Absolutely. So that first question being in what ways is organized religion harmful to communities? So many ways. But I do want to say that it is dependent on the actual church themselves, because you have some churches that are like, we're okay with this, and then you have other churches from the same denomination that is like, we're not okay with this. So in some ways, they're harmful is, when you don't believe in what they believe in.
Yeah.
Or some churches that are anti-LGBTQ, or some churches that basically have this structure of power to where only the priests, only the deacons can use the divination.
Yeah.
And you have to be, in that role of being a priest or, things of that nature. You have to be in that role in order to use your divination, or what I call divination. If you're not in that role, it's like, oh, it's demonic.
Yes.
So this is kind of a hard one, honestly. I know I helped come up with these questions, but it's a loaded question.
It really is. And I love how you mentioned the gatekeeper aspect of organized religion, because that's always, I think anyone that kind of ventures on more of a spiritual path, especially, it often is individual, right? Because there's not a lot of open-armed communities within spiritual practices, because of the world that we live in, right? And a lot of stigma and stuff attached to that, or demonization of what I view. Like, I know a lot of, Catholic practicing people use magic.
Absolutely.
Use different forms of divination and all that. And the gatekeeping aspect is always a little sad to me, because you shouldn't have to ask someone else to knock on the door to talk to spirit, right? You shouldn't have to, be granted permission.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the interesting thing about Christianity versus some of the older religions is, I don't want to speak for all Christians, everyone, so I'm just speaking over from my experience. So when it comes to, because I did grow up, in the Catholic Church, so I have the Roman Catholic Christians, and then that's my mom's side. My father's side more grew up in the Baptist sector and the non-denominational sector. It's very much so, you have to believe in our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Yeah. And if you don't, you're going to go to hell. So when you look at these other religions that have been around longer, like Ifa, which is, the African religion that talks about the Orishas, or Santeria, which is a combination of Ifa, the African religion, and in Roman Catholicism. Yeah. When you look at these older religions, it's actually part of their belief to respect outside religions. Yeah. And a lot of people don't know this, but also it says in the Quran.
I was just going to bring up Islam. That's hilarious.
Islam as well, to where it's like, you have to respect. So really, I mean, I hate to say organized religion. It's really the people that run the show.
Yep. I think the problem is when we pair religion with colonization.
Yeah.
And I think regardless, especially in a Western lens, a lot of those social concepts and foundational aspects of nationalism and colonial practices are in the religious practices, right? Because religion, I mean, the church and the state were hand in hand and still try to be and still kind of are now, right? And so I always see it as like organized religion is beautiful in the concept, right? Because we really do need community, especially around spiritual and faith-oriented things. To me, it makes your practices, your life, your rituals more full.
Absolutely.
And without the community, you don't have that. And with the community, there's all those nasty aspects that can come along. Prejudice, anti-queer rhetoric, all these things that are exclusionary when it should be completely inclusive.
Yeah, really, I agree. It could be really vice versa. It could be harmful. It could be helpful. There's 1,000,001 ways it could be harmful, but there's also 1,000,001 ways it could be helpful. And I always think it's really important for us to honor both sides, honor the history of what colonialism has done to, Black and brown people. Honor that history of the way that Christianity has affected us negatively. However, also honor the history of how it's brought people together, how it's helped people find community, how it does work for some people, So I think it's really important to not be black and white when it comes to these type of topics and to have that gray area and to say, okay, I see the harmful aspects and I see the aspects that are not harmful. Most importantly, I think it's really important for religious leaders to honor both sides. Like, for an example, I grew up in the Catholic Church, went to Cristo Rey Church my entire life, received my first 3 sacraments. I always stood out to our former priest, and I was like, I have some questions for you. And right away, he was like, you're not thinking about leaving the church, are you?
The Q word,
I said, well, no. I said, but the thing is, I have some issues with, the homophobia and transphobia. I said, I don't really agree with that. I believe God loves all of his children, regardless. Like, I don't think being gay is a sin. I don't think homosexuality is a sin. And basically, now this is a Catholic priest, which I know a lot of other Catholic priests would disagree. But he was like, I understand what you're saying, but you got to understand the Bible was written a long time ago. So what I'm letting you know is God loves all of you. And I'm letting you know I would get you married in this church. I would baptize someone that's trans. I would marry a transgender couple. I'm letting you know that God loves you. And that Bible was written so long ago. But that's just one aspect. So, when you think about even the Archdiocese of Michigan and Lansing and how conservative they are, if you go to I won't say any names, but a specific cathedral and you ask that same question, they would tell you, oh, no. No, we don't do that. You're going to hell, you need to repent. So I think it's really important to honor both ways that are harmful and helpful. We could do a whole podcast on those two issues. But I don't think it's helpful to paint religion out to be something that is harmful and demonic and horrible. No, it depends on the organization and how they run.
Absolutely.
A lot of people like to blame the religion, but they don't blame the person.
The people.
And the people, because that's what it comes down to.
It does. And how you move through the world. I think I do love the yes and with every conversation, right? Because you can hold both. Even if they're at tension with each other, we can definitely hold two things at the same time. And not be comfortable. It's okay not to be comfortable.
Right.
It's okay.
They don't want to have those, a lot of people don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations, especially when it comes to their belief systems, because they're just so offended. Which I get it. But at the same time, it's like...
Sometimes I think a lot of times people are terrified that if you strip away some of those things, there's not going to be anything left. Like the pieces of themselves will be gone. And that's not the truth. I mean, anyone that's deconstructed their faith knows that while it is a very hard process, it is a necessary one sometimes to find who you really are and who your community is, and like how you move through the world and why that's important.
Absolutely, very important. Like I had a conversation because I'm a witch doctor, because of what I do. There's a lot of misconceptions.
Yeah.
Of course, when we talk about colonialism, the colonizers, the Catholic Church came over here. They killed off all the witches. They killed the shamans. They killed the witch doctors. So, automatically we're demonized right away. So I had a conversation with someone who was Christian. I have a lot of Christian friends that, love me, But I had a conversation with a Christian business owner because she was asking me, like, what I do for money. I was telling her, like, I've been traveling the world because as a shaman, we travel a lot. We help people and we move around to help other people. And she had said, what do you do? And I was explaining to her. Now, she has a background from Africa, very, very strict Christian folks, okay?
Yeah.
And when I told her what I did, she was like, well, you got to be careful because you want to go to hell. And I told her, I said, well, I don't believe in hell.
Yeah.
Like, in shamanism, hell is the underworld. And that's an entirely different concept,
It's not somewhere you're going to go to burn to death
exactly.
and be tortured. Yeah.
It's somewhere you go to actually heal.
Yeah.
So she just was kind of shocked. And she was like, well, how do you know that what you're doing isn't demonic? And I said, well, I have the gift of discernment. Because in the Bible, the gift of discernment talks about having these abilities and being able to discern good from bad. And she just kind of looked at me like very confused. But I was proud of myself because I stood my ground and I was calm. And then she was just, trying to force her beliefs. I mean, she said, so you're not Christian? I said, correct. I'm not Christian.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I said, my belief is Jesus loves us all. And I told her, I said, first and foremost, Jesus did not sit down and say, I'm going to create Christianity. Christianity was formed upon Jesus' story.
Yeah.
Really, Jesus spoke against Christianity. I mean, the Pharisees thought he was a witch.
Yeah, from what Christianity definitely has become.
Yeah.
I would tend to agree with you, right?
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to what we were talking about when colonialism and this, now capitalism gets intermingled in with religion and it's used as a tool for power, right?
Exactly.
So to me, like, that's the God a lot of people are tapping into, is one of greed. One of power and authority, which can be very damning, right?
It is.
And I don't think a lot of people realize too that it's not just the queer people, it's not just the pagans, the witch doctors, it's not the outsiders that you're just hurting. It's not just them. Like, you're hurting yourself. Every single time that you prevent someone else from being 100% fully, safely themselves, you're taking a piece of yourself too. Because you're telling yourself, like, it's not okay to be safe. It's not okay to be fully who I am.
Right.
And even if you don't mirror everything that person is, there's a piece of you that you're not sharing with the world.
Right.
And that's a damn shame.
It is a shame because, Jesus' story was all about unconditional love and acceptance.
And that's a hard one.
And that's, and the thing is, like, so when I was talking to her and others, whenever these, not all Christians, but the Christians that do come at me, I come back to the story of Christ, and I'm saying, well, the Christ of my understanding, love and accepts me for who I am. And he taught us that you have to be careful with organized religion because it's a personal relationship.
Yeah.
So I always go back to Christ. And what I tell those Christians that disagree, because not all Christians disagree, I say, I'm a believer of Christ, and he is the homie. He's not the main homie, though. I'm a witch doctor. I work with multiple different deities.
Yeah.
But I have a relationship with him, but it's not through, it's sort of through the religion, because there's a little mix, but it's not in the same way. It's a personal relationship. Like, we have an understanding that's beyond what the scope of organized religion is.
Yeah.
It just gets so convoluted.
It does. I want to steer us a little back.
Yep.
This is a great conversation, but I want to look more at, like, social justice and faith-based communities.
Yeah.
Especially when we're looking at, like, the Black Lives Matter movement and LGBTQ equality movement. So I come from, well, at least the last 3 or 4 years, I've been a Unitarian Universalist. I will say we are very, very liberal, forward, social justice oriented group.
Yeah.
And we still have a lot of problems, right? We still have, like, this appeal to authority that we look for. We have this way of moving through spaces sometimes as a savior and not as, like, a counterpart or someone who's complicit in helping someone strive for justice, and ourselves, right? Like, and so I kind of want to look at how you feel about organized religion and social justice, and we can definitely look at the lens because there's like some that
So
aren't
much. I know.
at all.
We could do like a 7-day podcast. Yeah. Well, I do want to get started on the Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter movement. My apologies. So it was interesting because when the Black Lives Matter movement just first started, we went to this conference or this rally. We were in this Baptist church with a bunch of people, and a dear friend of mine stood up and said, like, yeah, this Black Lives Matter, this is wrong. Like, yeah, we need to fight for our people, but what about the Black trans lives?
Yeah.
Right. So then you heard an older woman say, oh, well, we're not here to talk about that. So right away, this just reminds me of, really, I'm calling them out. I'm calling people out today. The hypocrisy of the church, especially the hypocrisy of the Black church. And I know because I have experience in the Black church. It's like they don't want, how do I say this? They don't want equality. They want privilege.
Yeah.
Because it's like, yeah, we understand and we recognize that Black lives do matter. But what about Black trans lives? What about Black gay lives? And they tend to forget that Christ told us to want to love one another. So it's kind of like they leave the LGBTQ movement out of their own movement for social justice, which is not social justice. That's the thing. It's not. And they just kind of like say, oh, yeah, well, we matter, but, these other oppressed people, because it's in the Bible and this is what we believe, we're not going to focus on this. And it's just like, well, you have Black queer people. It's not a separation. So I've seen that, and it's really heartbreaking because the way they justify it, not all Black Christians, but this is more of the stricter, Pentecostal and Baptist church. The way they justify it is, well, in the Bible, homosexuality is a sin. So I'm like, okay, well, you're not advocating for social justice. Yeah. If that's your belief and you're going around telling people, well, this is how you live your life, again, you don't want equality. You want privilege. Yeah.
And I think that comes back to like what we were talking about, how the systems meld together once again when you have colonialism and white supremacy and all these concepts. That's the foundation for all of us. Like we're all born into the system. There's definitely different levels of privilege and also oppression, right?
Right.
And so sometimes it takes a lot of inward looking and outward looking at your community and stuff to be like, I notice these kind of themes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's hard. I mean, I know as someone who has been deconstructing my own bullshit for too long, it's hard.
It is so really hard. It is because, I know friends that have left the church and they're like, yeah, well, I feel alienated now. I feel like I don't have a community. Like I had one friend that left the Pentecostal church, Black Pentecostal church, because they basically were against LGBTQ folks, and this is a local church. Well, they spoke against LGBTQ folks because in their mind, if they speak against it, they're like, well, this is my belief, and they don't see it as hate. Yeah. But they don't understand that it's hate. Yeah. But anyways, one of the main reasons he left is because essentially they were teaching that yoga was demonic, So it's interesting because it's hard for people to stand up and say, hey, this isn't right. Yeah. In some churches, that's not allowed. And then they get alienated. And then, they get outed.
And that's a tool.
Church.
That's a tool of authority, right? That community in the hands often of religious, political extremists. Yeah. Regardless, right? Yeah. Is used as a tool to continue to subdue who is in the community so they don't leave, right? Because if you leave, you no longer have this support, right? Yeah. And so you get yourself thinking, is it better to be alone and free or together and quiet, right?
Yeah, exactly. For sure. Like just in regards to all of these movements centered around social justice, it's like, it's just kind of sad because it's like, no, you can't use your belief system or the Bible or whatever the case may be to justify why you're not advocating for people that are oppressed. Yeah. Oh, it's because of my beliefs. Okay, that's fine. But again, you're not an LGBTQ plus ally. and you're not an advocate. Now, people would get upset and say, oh, well, you can't say that because I'm Christian and this is what we believe. Well, yes, I can, because just because you're Christian or whatever you are does not give you a get out of jail free card.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
so
the same language that you're using to oppress someone else is the language people are using to oppress you.
yeah, and then it gets really deep because you think about colonialism.
Oh, and however, like, I think about this a lot, right? Especially in the spiritual realm, because when we're looking at this tension of privilege and oppression from a spiritual lens, especially coming from a white-bodied person, when my ancestors came here, they gave up who they were freely for whiteness.
Yeah.
That was a choice that they had, right? Granted, there is some generational, things that come along with that. And with black and brown bodies, they didn't get a choice, right? The same thing happened. Their identity, their past was taken from them. That piece of them was taken by force, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think a lot of, especially white-bodied people, come back to the class conversation about how, well, I struggled. So why should I be out here, helping with the Black Lives Matter movement, because it's the same. It's like, it's not the same. There's definitely different degrees, and that's the same thing, right? Because it's a lot easier. Pet Me, which is a great local band, in one of their songs, they say, it's a lot easier. You got to start punching up instead of kicking down.
Yeah.
Right? Because like, from one person who is being oppressed to the other, it's a lot easier to kick down than it is to punch up. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. What was I going to say? I completely forgot. I'm lost in conversation.
Oh, no, you're good.
I was going to repeat something I said earlier, but let me not repeat. They heard it the first time.
No, you're good. Actually, this kind of brings me to another question about honoring sacred tradition and practices. So this comes back to kind of what I was talking about, because I know that in a lot of spiritual movements, especially with white-bodied people, we tend to appropriate other cultures because we don't have our own, right? Like, there's not these like indigenous things that rituals we have. So we just commandeer them, and we don't understand the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation, especially when we're talking about indigenous traditions, right?
Yeah.
Like, the thing that comes to my mind every single time, right, is like sage, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
And so I'm just wondering, like, how you feel about that, like.
Yeah, so it's tough because a lot of it is commercialized, and
Yes.
some people, some Caucasian people don't even realize what they're doing. So, the two questions that I thought about was, how do we honor the sacred traditions and wisdoms that's often rooted in indigenous healing practices? That's the first thing, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing you need to ask spirit, well, for me, or your higher self, is your intuition. Should I be burning sage?
Yeah.
Should I be teaching this form of meditation? Should I be giving shamanic journeys if, I know how to do them, but I'm not a shaman? I might be a shamanic practitioner, but should I be doing this? Does this feel right? If you get the okay, that's great. But that's the first step of getting the okay. The second step is actually giving offerings to the spirits and to the beings and to the tribes that brought this tradition to us. So, what I would tell someone that is white or unsure, or even they just don't know if this comes from their background, before you burn the sage, first and foremost, ask yourself if it feels right, or can you find a sage or a smudge that is more in alignment with your bloodline?
Yeah.
Because it don't have to be sage.
Yeah, you can seining, right? So
Right.
seining is to make something holy, and usually Celtic tradition.
Right.
You can burn not white sage, but things like, European sage. We're talking about mugwort and stuff, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Other things, pine
Yep.
would be a really great one, right? Like, there's so many. And I love. Oh, I think we're gonna have a lot in common. I love the relational component that you talk about, because within my own practice, regardless, not only who and what came before, but like the land that I'm currently on, like the relationship that I have with the space in time right now that I'm at.
Yeah.
I need to have respect for that space, that land, those beings that are on the land, and those that came before.
Absolutely.
Right?
And this is the thing. As witch doctors, as people of color, I still, even though I have the Cherokee in my bloodline, I have, the Aztec in my bloodline, I have the Olmec in my bloodline, I know it, I'm sure of it, I still have to give offerings in rituals. Like, when I go and do work at a park, I give offering to the spirits of that land, no matter where I go. When I was living in Hawaii, I'm giving offerings to the spirits of the land just for being there. And see, that's what something people, they lack. They don't think about it. You should always give offerings. I give offerings to my sage bundles.
Yes.
You know, tobacco, water, even though I'm indigenous. That's because that's what our people did. We understand that it cannot be a relationship of take.
Yes.
There has to be a two. You have to honor everything. Like, one of the beliefs in shamanism is everything has a spirit. You have to honor all spirits when you work with them. So there's such a lack of doing that to where it becomes kind of like really disrespectful. We have a lot of people that are not of indigenous descent calling themselves shamans. They got trained to be what we call a shamanic practitioner, and we have white people doing this. You can get anyone can practice shamanism, right? But to be an actual shaman is completely different. We have practitioners out here, people out here that are shamanic practitioners, which means they've been trained through all the initiations, but they are not indigenous. They're white, which is fine, but you got to make sure you let people know, I'm not a real shaman. So, I'm a shamanic practitioner.
So I have a question then, though, because how would you go about that with, like, white indigenous practices that do have something that is akin to shaman, right?
Well, that's a little different, because there are those sacred. Yeah, I know what you're saying. There are those sacred white indigenous people. Like, for an example, they are like the Europeans, the Slovenians,
like
the Celts. That's a little different. And that, I mean, in my opinion, is, it gets convoluted. So there are certain words that they use for their practice, but it's typically not shaman. It's typically not witch doctor. In some cases, very rare cases it is, but they have their own traditions and their own way of doing things and labeling things that are similar to ours. There are a few, but they're very far and few.
I'm going to have to look more into this, too, because it's definitely not something that I have thought a lot about or had done a lot of research on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is really interesting. And so let's dive a little bit more into that then. What is the difference between being a shaman and a practitioner? Yeah.
Yeah, so when you are a shaman, you are chosen. Before you enter this body, the ancestors choose you. They say, he's going to be the one, whether he likes it or not. You know, I've had clients that I work with, and they're like, well, I want to be trained in shamanism. I want you to teach me to be a shaman. I said, I can show you our shamanic techniques, but there are certain things I can't teach you.
Yeah.
And there are a number of initiatory rites that I went through. Not a choice.
Yeah.
So a lot of people think, oh, well, you can't wake up and become a shaman. I mean, the work has gotten so hard. I mean, I'm 30 years old now, but, you know, I got initiated in, I think, around 2019, 2020. But I was born into this life as a witch doctor. The work is so hard and so heavy that most people wouldn't be able to go through it, the actual initiation. So you do have people out here calling themselves shamanic practitioners, and they practice contemporary shamanism.
Okay.
And the reason, and this is white people, so the reason why they're doing it is because where they say the actual thing is too tough, it's too heavy. And it's like, well, you know, you're kind of taking our culture and you're saying, oh, okay, I don't want all the heavy stuff.
I'll just take the easy stuff.
I'll take the easy stuff. I'm going to make it contemporary shamanism so it's not the real thing, and I don't have to go through all the pain and the suffering that shamans do. Also, you know, it has to be in your bloodline. It has to be something that, you know, you have to be a person of color. There are those one-off white indigenous people, but they're usually not called shamans. Like, I think one of them is called like I don't want to get the name wrong, but it's similar to shamanism. So the main thing is having indigenous bloodline and having a strong indigenous bloodline. You know, we're not talking about 1%. We're talking about you can trace your indigeneity back to, you know, your ancestors. That's the one thing. The second thing is it's not just about being indigenous. It's about being chosen. It's a birthright. It's not something that we get to choose. I've tried to stop this work for a while. Spirit is like, no. So there's that thing. The third thing are the very sacred initiatory rites that we go through. When you get trained to become a shamanic practitioner, which again is not a shaman, you go through initiatory rites, but they're not the actual initiatory rites. So those initiations are often very painful. They can be very scary to outside people. So those are the three things that really make you one. But the biggest thing is you have to be born into this world as one. Then you have to, of course, you have to have the indigenous bloodline that you can trace back. And you have to go through those initiatory rites, which are really painful. Unfortunately, what's happening across the world right now is you do have indigenous tribes suing white people for calling themselves shamans and making money off of it because they are like, you are not a shaman.
Yeah.
You know, you did not go through what we went through, what our people went through. And it's not like every indigenous person is a shaman. Like I said, like, you're chosen. Like, most people are like, oh, okay, we found out he was a shaman of the family. I'm so glad it wasn't me. So it's been so commercialized.
Yeah.
And, like, people hear the word shaman. There's a lot of tribes in the UP, they don't like the word because of what the New Age movement has done to it.
Yeah.
They're like, I don't want to hear that. We're medicine men.
I mean, you pair spiritualism with capitalism, and that's usually what you get. Anything that's going to make money for a corporation, you'll see on the shelves of Walmart sooner or later.
Yeah, and it's so, like, for an example, with the contemporary shamanism, there's sometimes when we do rituals and it takes days, weeks, even sometimes months for us to come back and feel normal. The Hmong shamans, I don't want to go too into details, but there's a ritual they do when they heal someone, and it takes them weeks. They're sick for weeks to recover. You know, that's why it's like, it's really important that people are not just throwing this shamanism around. It's okay to teach certain aspects of, you know, shamanism, but to call yourself a shaman, you have to really, really, really be one, you know? And you have to go through the training and be born into it. So it's very interesting. And there's a way to respect it, respect the shamanism, and to say, nope, I'm a shamanic practitioner. I'm not the real thing.
Yeah.
I may have went through some initiations, but it's not the real thing. Anyone can practice shamanism. It's not like it's a closed practice.
Okay.
It's really not. It's more of, don't be calling yourself a shaman.
Yeah.
You're not. Like, for an example, like, I practice certain parts about Christianity, but I'm not Christian.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like, underworld journeys, journeying to the underworlds and the upper worlds, like, you can go to a shaman can teach you how to do that. You can do that on your own time.
Yeah.
You know, but don't call yourself a shaman.
Okay.
So it gets a little crazy.
How do you think I'm going to move us into
Absolutely.
more of like the social justice realm with that?
Absolutely.
So tying it to what you were just talking about, though, and respecting traditions that are outside of your own realm, right? Outside of even your own understanding, and how that actually does tie into social justice.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, I kind of went on a rant when we started talking about that.
No, you're good. I got a lot of good information. Like I said, I don't have a lot of background or understanding.
Okay, gotcha. So one thing is, so there's this lack of honoring sacred indigenous traditions and wisdoms, usually from people outside of indigenous and Native American ancestry.
Yeah.
When you are a spiritualist, or whatever the case may be, if you're using sage or you're teaching a class, you want to tell the people, this comes from indigenous traditions. I want to pay respect and honor to these traditions or these rituals, where they stem from, first and foremost, before I teach these classes or before I show you how to do this ritual. It's important to recognize, pay respect, and give offerings instead of just teach something because all the new agers are doing it or because it's an open practice or you found it online. Open practice is a loaded term, but recognizing where it comes from, recognizing the pain that the people went through. To
especially
keep it here.
Especially because a lot of indigenous practices, a lot of people I don't think understand that it's not just because you're using it. It's because it was criminalized for their people to use it. And so if you take something without respect and understanding and historical knowledge, right? You're missing a huge component. And we're talking
Exactly.
about working within the like spirit realm, working within spirituality, magic, whatever word you would like to use. It's a relational thing, right?
It is.
Everything, at least for me, is based on relationships
Absolutely.
with everything. And so
Yeah.
that means understanding more fully
Yeah,
what
for
you're
sure.
doing and how you're moving through
Yeah, and the
spaces.
biggest thing is there are spirits that reside over every single thing.
Yeah.
The last thing you want to do is upset them.
Yeah.
You know, there are parts of shamanism. When I say open and closed practice, it's a little complicated. I consider it an open practice because there are certain things you can do. You don't have to be a shaman.
Yeah.
However, there are other things that you should never do without being a shaman. So it depends on what you're doing in shamanism, of course. But there are certain things, certain practices that we do that are closed off. And one of the reasons for that being is respect.
Yeah.
And honestly, very dangerous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said you practice hoodoo as well, right? Is the
Yeah.
same kind of concept with that,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of things that it sounds cool, you know, but it could be dangerous. You don't want to
Yeah.
like go into territory in which you don't understand and you're not welcome.
Yeah.
Even if you are best intentioned, like the impact is different from the intention.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think that, you know, hoodoo is a little different. I would say hoodoo is a little more open because it's more of a practice you can make your own. There's no rules. I mean, there are certain things. It stems from shamanism, but it's like it's a result of a melting pot of you have the Native Americans, we were already here. Then you have the African slaves that came over. You have the white slaves that came over too, because there are white slaves that came over from Europe that, you know, were slaves under kings and queens. Then you have, you know, the white people that were privileged that came over. So you have all of these oppressed people in this melting pot. So the Native Americans taught, you know, the slaves, the Africans, this is how you do this is how you do that. You know, they taught the white slaves too, and just the white poor people. This is how you do this is how you do that. And that's kind of how it became hoodoo, because then, you know, the white people that were not privileged, they blended some of their Wicca in. They're like, oh, this makes sense because this is the same. And then the people that were from Africa blended their practice in and also said, oh, you know, makes sense. And then with colonization and Christianity, they were like, oh, okay, well, we can use the Bible to cast spells and herbs. So it's kind of more of a melting pot. So it's more of an open practice versus other belief systems like Ifa. Like, I'll give you an example in regards to the social justice aspect. Ifa, so I have a background in Santeria as well, so I'm a child of Ochun. And there was a TikToker, a white woman, who, very talented psychic medium, was like, I'm channeling Ochun, this is what she's saying. And she was saying some very offensive things. And then she was like, oh yeah, and don't put honey under your tongue, you know, because that's witchcraft, and Ochun is saying this, Ochun is saying that. And then under the comments, all of the people of color who actually are initiated into Ifa and initiated into Santeria, you know, were like, what are you talking about? You have no right to speak about Ochun like this. You have no right to channel her and to say these things. This doesn't resonate with us. Now, these are actual children of Oshun, you know, who have Nigerian blood, children of Oshun who are in Santeria, who, you know, ancestors were in the Atlantic slave trade. Yeah. Combating her, saying, this is so wrong of you. Like, how dare you channel her, for one. First and foremost, you weren't channeling her. Second of all, what you're saying about it wasn't accurate. And she got offended. So that kind of is like, she turned off the comments. So it becomes that social justice aspect of think about what you do before you do it, you know, and make sure you pay respect. The biggest thing, respect. Should I be doing it? Okay, if I can do it, great. Let me pay respect. Let me give offerings and let me acknowledge. Kind of like how MSU is just now acknowledging within the past 4 years that they're on like Anishinaabe and other tribal lands. Like, you guys are just now doing this.
So that brings up a good point. So like when I was talking about how within UU spaces we are very liberal and forward, you know, and sometimes it's more of appeal to authority or like this. What is my partner says cheap grace, because we'll get up and do a land acknowledgement.
Right.
Where's the praxis? Where's you're talking it.
Yeah.
What are
Where's
you
the
doing?
offerings?
Yeah. What
Yeah.
are you doing with that? You can say whatever you like all day long. Where as MSU, I do appreciate a lot of their indigenous stuff that they're doing in regards to
Yeah.
like the youth and all of that stuff. They have a lot of really good programs
Yeah.
now, which to me is praxis. That's practice right there.
Yeah.
That is literally respecting. But if we're just out here talking and we're just
Yeah.
saying, I am on the land. Okay, cool. What are you going to do with that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, MSU and amongst other institutions, they're not doing enough.
No.
You
Well, they
know?
won't ever because
They
it's
won't
like,
ever,
it's not, it doesn't make them more money
Yeah,
to
it's
do
not,
more.
It's not. It doesn't make sense in capitalism.
Yeah.
And they got their shareholders.
Yep. Like I feel as if in our system, we do enough to make us look good enough so that we're not deemed evil.
Right.
And that's not enough for me. That's not enough for me.
I agree 100%. Like, a lot of people don't know the history of East Lansing, Okemos.
Oh, yeah.
They don't know that there's a certain part on campus that Chief Okemos' daughter is buried.
Oh,
on
I did not know
campus.
that. That's cool.
There's no grave mark, but what happened was, I won't get too much into the story, but they knew that this is where Chief Okemos' daughter, and I learned this from from someone much older than me that has history on all the information of the area. I didn't even know. And what he was letting me know is, he was like, yeah, they discovered, behind closed doors, they discovered, like, this has to be, they were under the assumption that they found the gravesite of Chief Okemos' daughter. The reason they were under the assumption is because there was a very large rock placed there.
Okay.
So, people were like, oh, because of where this is and this large rock, they're like, this has to be a gravesite, and there's other evidence that proves it. So what MSU did was they moved the rock and they tried to build dormitories over where the rock was. So what ended up happening was those dormitories burnt down. So now there's a part on campus where you'll notice it's actually right behind the old museum. There's an MSU library, there's an old museum.
Yeah.
There's that big courtyard. It's across the street from the Union.
Yeah.
Where nothing's built. That's for a reason, because they try to build on, Chief Okemos' daughter's gravesite. So it just it gets really fuzzy and blurred lines. Because even when it comes to organized religions, people will be like, oh, well, herbs, crystals, that's demonic, that's the devil. The other Christians are like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
So then it's like, with organized religion, a lot of them can't even come to a consensus
Of
and
what's
agree.
what. Mm-hmm.
And
I hate the word demonic. Can we just take a moment and just break down that awful word? Because anything that is not an angel or God or Jesus is demonic. And
yeah, exactly.
That's super frustrating because it's like there's so many things that you lumped in because of control and power and authority.
Yeah.
And I hate that word so much. And
it
makes me laugh though, because if that's what it takes,
right,
be scared.
Right. And this next part I'll share with you actually will tie more into the colonialism and the social justice aspect of religion. So if you look into the meaning of demon in Latin and you break it down, it actually means diamond, right? So that's the interesting part, because people don't realize that Christianity is very much so an occult religion. They don't understand that a lot of what is in Christianity has been stolen from indigenous traditions and ancient traditions.
Yeah, it's been absorbed, right?
It's been absorbed, and it's what makes Christianity so powerful.
Yeah. I mean, that's why if you go to Mexico and you look at Catholicism,
exactly,
it's much different brand of Catholicism because they had to integrate the native practices at the time. So something that recently has been screaming at me is Santa Muerte, right? A good death. Which, is a good death, right? And so, that's just an example of how, and now she's, super popular, right? She's, starting to be commercialized, which is really unfortunate. And it's very gross to me, though, because if you don't integrate, you're wiped out, right? If you do not find a way to work within the system, you're pushed out. And it brings me back to what you said earlier about people are looking for privilege, not for real justice, right?
Yeah.
And so like that's always this tension in my brain about how to work within a system and also want to be outside of it.
Yeah.
Because like every step you take up is perpetrating and propping up the system in which you live in. And how do you move through spaces, especially social justice spaces and advocacy spaces, without burning yourself out and also holding both of those tensions at the same time?
Yeah. I think for me, that's something I struggled with for a long time, even when I was in state working on my BA, which I did not work for me. I was not meant to be in the system, but it was arts and humanities, so social justice based. For me, being very confident in who I am and my abilities, my own culture and my own perspective, and not taking things so personal when there's outside perspective. I think a lot of times, especially when we have this discourse, we feel the anger of other people we're talking to, and we take it as our own anger.
Yeah.
And then we're even more angry about what we're talking about. So I think a really big part of that is emotional intelligence, which is a hard concept for a lot of people. But if you're emotionally intelligent to understand, you need to have these conversations. You need to do them in a way that's not going to make the rest of your day horrible.
Yeah.
It's okay to be angry and upset, but at the same time, like, if this is affecting your mental health, like, you need to learn how to cut off energy.
Yeah.
And
or accept it, right? So like
exactly. Yeah, and accept it. And
anger,
be like, confident in who you are. You can't change the world, but you know what you stand for.
Yeah.
You can't force that on other people. Like even the aspect of like the whole religion thing, right? When we think about Christianity and we think about Christ, and we think about all the occultism that's already in Christianity before, the indigenous people touched it. It's just like a prime of example. Or like we think about the Catholic Church and we think about how the African slaves were like, oh, the Virgin Mary, this is Yemoja. Oh, okay. Our Lady of Charity, this is Ochun. Okay, so because of colonialism, this is being forced on us.
Yeah.
So let's find a way to integrate our practices
and
say, oh, no, this is still us.
Yeah.
But some people, that's why they look down on these practices. That's why some people say, oh, well, Roman Catholicism isn't Christianity. It's demonic because they worship the saints. So, just the social aspect of religion in itself social justice aspect has kind of been fascinating. For myself, when I lead into these conversations, I'm like, this is how I feel.
Yeah.
This is why I feel this way. I'm going to listen and hold space for you. And I'm either going to choose to react if it's for my highest good or walk away. Yeah. And that's something I've had to really hone in on. It can really affect your mental health. Know some people are out here thinking like this.
I know. And to disconnect yourself from that reality too.
Yeah. Then, like you said, it is okay to be angry.
It definitely is, because anger, people need to understand that anger is the emotion of change. Your body is telling you that something needs to change. And so if you do not understand that, you're looking to fight someone. You're looking to protect yourself instead of being like, okay, what in this situation needs to change? Is it me?
Right, exactly.
Is it the situation? Is it the space? What exactly is going on here? Instead of analyzing those things, which can be very, very hard when things are like coursing through your body, right? And that's where the emotional intelligence comes in, because you got to understand when it's time to stay. And when it's time to go.
Yeah. And even with the emotional intelligence, like for an example, if I walk into it, I've been to confession when I was actually Catholic, walk into, a confession room, am I going to expect a Catholic priest? Well, not within my church, because my church, we were actually pretty liberal Mexican Catholic church, but, like a Catholic priest from the actual cathedral downtown to be okay with my sexuality? No. Yeah. I'm going to expect that. So it's also, when you're having these conversations about social justice, expect to have combative energy coming your way. Yeah. Expect to be criticized and expect to criticize back. You're not going to ask
nicely for not to be oppressed, right? There's no, please don't, please stop, please right? Don't. Like, it's not going to work. And so, like, there's definitely going to be tension and uncomfortable spaces, and we have to figure out what roles we play in that, right? Exactly. Each of us individually, like, what are my strengths? What can I bring to the table? What do I have to leave at the table and allow someone else to take up, right? Because it's not going to be your job to do everything.
Exactly.
And then also, how are we caring for each other after we leave that space?
Yeah. Yeah,
Even
that's
if we
true.
don't agree.
That is true.
You know,
That's very
that's
true.
hard. That's real hard.
It is really hard, especially if you're very sensitive and intuitive. You have these
Yeah.
abilities. Like, that's why for me, spirit does not allow me to do certain things. Like, they won't allow me to go to certain rallies. I want to show up, but I can't because I can feel everyone's emotions.
Yeah.
And I take it home with me. What was that? Something really important that you mentioned that I wanted to hit on. I forgot. Never mind. It's going to come back to me.
It'd be like 12 o'clock tonight, and you'd be like, ah.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally forgot.
That's okay. That's okay. So we talked a lot about the stuff that we kind of had planned for today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do want to hit on one more thing before we wrap up.
Yep.
The reclaiming part.
Oh,
So
yeah. Okay.
I think it's really important for us to talk about that,
Yes.
and then we can kind of wrap up and end the conversation. But what would you like to kind of teach us about?
Absolutely. So I'm starting a series called I'm starting a series called Reclaim. See, look at me, spirit. Come on. I'm starting a series called Reclaiming Our Indigeneity. And what it's about is, what does it mean to reclaim one's indigeneity, and how is it connected to religion, spirituality, just everything. So what this series is what does it look like to reclaim your indigeneity? And this doesn't necessarily mean you have to be indigenous. What does it look like to find out what your people were like before capitalism?
Yeah.
Even European people. You
Yeah.
know, before the system.
I mean, we're all indigenous somewhere.
Exactly. So it's more of returning to your roots of indigeneity.
Yeah.
So what did your people do to survive and thrive? Or what spiritual practices did they have in place before capitalism started, before Uncle Sam started, before all these institutions came up? Not only that, but also, how does that look now that we are in the system?
Yeah.
So how are you integrating now that you are in colonialism and capitalism? Like hoodoo being a really big thing, because that's like a mixture of, you know, people being oppressed, and they're like, oh, okay, you're going to try to oppress us and force Christianity on us? Oh, okay,
It's a way to
great,
fight
we're going to
back.
use it against you.
Mhm.
You know, we're going to learn how to protect ourselves. Like, there's like a lot of amazing stories. If you know anything about High John Root, look up that. That's one story where you have these indigenous people, you have these slaves who start practicing hoodoo, and they start freeing themselves. They start practicing their own magic. So it's like,
Yeah.
how does your practice look like pre-colonialism and post-colonialism?
Yeah.
How can you return to your roots? How can you reclaim your own indigeneity? Like Nat Turner, he's actually an ancestor of mine. You know, with the movement he started, he was also well-versed in hoodoo. And that was his way to really reclaim his own indigeneity,
Yeah.
you know? So that's just like a series that I'm looking at right now. I'm probably
That's-
going to do like classes and workshops.
That's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So, where can someone find out about that
Uh-huh.
if they're interested?
So I am going to start having more classes in the community. So I have
Okay.
one that's called Introduction to Ancestral Veneration.
Oh, cool.
Yep. And then I have one coming up for Introduction to Hoodoo. I have another one for spiritual maintenance. I have another one for shamanic drumming, which I'll be hosting. So pretty much if you go onto my social medias, Shaman Miguel, or if you look at my hashtag Shaman Miguel, you'll find me online, and I'll be
Cool.
teaching these classes to the community. And again, it's not, reclaiming our indigeneity just for people of color, but, white people need to kind of figure out what their people were doing also before
Yeah.
all of this.
And I think too, we often forget that, like, so I look at ancestry in 3 different kind of levels. I
Yeah.
look at it from like an ancestral, not just bloodline, but tradition line, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to just come from your blood. It can come from tradition,
Traditions.
especially queer people, right?
Exactly.
Because some
Yeah.
of your ancestors may not be too friendly with the way that you're moving through the world, right?
Right.
And so ancestors of tradition are super important. And then also your present self, because like you're going to be someone's ancestor
Yeah.
one day. And so like how you move through the world, right? And so I always love, at least in my practice, to look at current, not too long ago, and we can look way in the
Yeah.
past, right? And like land always comes into this conversation
Oh, yeah,
about
for
like
sure.
connecting with the land that we're on.
Yeah, it's so
and
important.
where we have been, right? The
Yeah.
movement of, whatever people that you're from, right? And I'm really excited. I'm going to check your stuff out
Thank
because
you.
it sounds really, really exciting to me.
Yeah.
Because, like, I think, too, this is a conversation I have a lot with people when they hear, like, as a white person, you do ancestral, like, veneration. I'm like, yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Well, how? I mean, what do you mean how? Like, we all came from someplace.
There's a lot of questions about that. That's why, like, when I teach the class, I go over, like, what that is, what that's like. Now, of course, there are going to be certain classes I teach that are going to be, closed off to the white community for respect of the topic, right? But I think we all need to reclaim our indigeneity. We all need to figure out what our ancestors were like pre-colonialism and post-colonialism, because we have ancestors that were into Christianity, but they used herbs and they went to go see the witch doctor after church or the root worker. So it's like we need to analyze the pre-colonialism and the post-colonialism because there's power in both.
And I don't think we can figure out how to fully work through the world if we're only looking through a colonial lens.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so, and sharing with each other too, I think is super important because, diversity is important for a reason. It's that inclusion aspect, right? Like having so many different voices at your table that you get a whole picture, right?
Yeah.
Not just one siloed image of how things you want it to be, but more holistic, more beautiful.
Yeah, and doing the research. Like a lot of times people have this misconception that, oh, well, I don't know about this topic, so I feel this way. It's your job to educate yourself.
There's enough information out there.
There's enough documentaries. Like I've had, white straight people that are like, I don't understand pronouns or what is to be trans. And I'm like, they're looking at me because I'm queer, I'm two-spirit, and I'm indigenous. And I'm like, it's not my job to teach you.
Yeah.
Watch Paris is Burning, watch this, watch that. So I think a lot of it, honestly, is ignorance across just the human race. People don't do their research.
Yeah.
And I always
Or people don't know how to do good research.
Yeah, that's true too.
Well-informed research.
You're right. You're right. They'll probably be looking at biased things. That's true too. Because like when I started to get my BA, I learned how to. I grew up in an inner city school district. So when I went to Michigan State and got my BA, well, didn't get it, but worked on it. I learned how to do well-informed research.
Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest issues is people need to educate themselves instead of just listening to others. Even the people that are watching us today.
Yeah.
Don't go by what I'm saying. This is your journey.
It's
you
like
need
a
to figure
jumping off point.
Yeah, you need to figure this out on yourself. Like I have a lot of my clients. Sometimes there's certain things Spirit won't allow me to tell them. And I'm like, no, you need to figure this out on your own.
You
this
gotta
is
learn
what
yourself.
I can tell you. I think a lot of it with the capitalism and the colonialism is we look to these leaders, these presidents, these politicians, these religious leaders, these celebrities, these this, these that, which don't get me started on that whole puppetry show. We're not looking within ourselves.
Yeah.
We're not realizing that we're powerful beings and that we have past lives. And a lot of us are old souls and a lot of us have been witches and things in past lives. You need to go within and listen to Spirit and listen to your higher self to get the answer.
Yeah.
In today's world, unfortunately, a lot of people are disconnected from Spirit. They're disconnected from their higher selves. They're looking to their politician or their president or their favorite singer or celebrity
to fill that gap.
Exactly. And it's okay to like admire and respect people, but don't worship them. Worship yourself so you can figure this out. Because sometimes, even with my practice, Spirit will tell me to go left and everyone in the world is going right.
Yeah.
And this is the biggest issue for a lot of people is because when you are meant to move with Spirit, you are meant to move in the world differently.
Yeah.
The things that you are going to do are not going to make sense to the masses because you're not here to follow the masses.
And that's okay.
And that's okay,
Okay. And sometimes we need people to remind us of that when we can't remind ourselves.
Yeah, like how you feel about it, not how this person feels. So the biggest thing is go within. Even with everything we talked about today, go within. Have respect, but go within.
If there's anything you get out of this, it's go within. I'm going to put that on the...
Don't go in what your human is telling you and what the logic is telling you, what the brain is telling you. Go in with what your spirit is telling you.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, we're 90%, the way that our mind works, we're about 90% human and 10% spirit. So people usually navigate through their human
Yeah.
And it's an issue because spirit is the most important. So it's like, we need you to kind of like tune into spirit more.
Yeah.
That would solve a lot of issues. But of course, that's
a
from your
whole
witch
nother
doctor.
podcast. That's a whole nother podcast.
Right.
We just do
Right.
10 of these. We'll just sit down and do a 10-part series.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, well, Miguel, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
this
you
has
for
been
having me.
enlightening
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
beautiful.
Uh-huh.
Anyone watching or listening, go check out Miguel the Shaman on Instagram.
Yep. Shaman Miguel right now.
Oh,
so
Shaman
my
Miguel.
Instagram
Okay.
is Shaman Miguel.
Okay.
Any Facebook or Instagram, if you do hashtag Shaman Miguel, you'll find me.
Perfect.
I'm working on a website. I do give readings. I give cleansings. I give healings. Website coming soon. And yeah, just reach
check
out
out
to
those-
me if it feels right.
check out those future classes.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
thank you again.
Yeah, of course.
I can't wait to extend this conversation in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here. So thank you for your time.